The shelter always woke up quietly. Morning light spilled through the high windows, warming the concrete floors just enough to soften the chill. Bowls were filled. Doors were checked. Volunteers moved gently, careful not to disturb the calm that had settled after the night. In the corner kennel, a sandy-colored dog sat upright, watching. His name tag read Milo. Every morning, without fail, Milo waited until the room felt still. Then he stood, stretched once, and walked toward the laundry cart. He didn't rush. He didn't wag wildly. He simply reached up, grasped a single folded blanket in his mouth, and carried it back to his kennel with slow, deliberate care. The staff noticed, but at first, they smiled and moved on. Some dogs chewed. Some barked. Milo collected. He arranged the blanket carefully, nudging it into place with his nose, circling once before sitting beside it. His eyes stayed focused, calm, as if he were completing a task he'd been given long ago. When a volunteer tried to remove the blanket, Milo gently leaned forward, not possessive, just quietly insistent. "Maybe he likes the smell," someone said. But the next day, he did it again. And the next. Always one blanket. Never more. Never rushed. Always chosen with care. A volunteer began watching him more closely. She noticed how Milo paused before selecting one. How he sniffed, hesitated, then committed. How, once the blanket was placed, his shoulders relaxed, as if something inside him had settled. There was no anxiety in his eyes. Only purpose. By the end of the week, the pile in his kennel had grown, and so had the questions. Milo wasn't hoarding comfort. He was responding to something unseen. Something remembered. What the dog sensed would change everything. The shelter woke the same way every morning. Not with noise, but with light. Sunrise slipped through the tall windows, thin and golden, touching the concrete floors and warming the air just enough to feel kind. The building breathed softly in metal doors, distant footsteps, the quiet hum of morning routines beginning. Bowls clinked gently. Keys jingled once, then stilled. In the far row of kennels, a sandy-colored dog sat upright. His posture was calm. Alert but peaceful. The tag on his collar read Milo. He didn't bark when the lights came on. Didn't pace. Didn't press against the bars like the others. He simply watched. Milo's eyes followed the room the way someone might watch a familiar place come back to life. As if he already knew what would happen next, and was waiting for the right moment. When the shelter settled, when the footsteps slowed and the voices softened, Milo stood. One smooth stretch. A quiet breath. Then he walked. Not toward the door. Not toward the food bowl. He moved down the aisle toward the laundry cart. A volunteer noticed him and smiled. "He's up early," she whispered to another. Milo rose on his back legs, just enough to reach. His mouth closed gently around a folded blanket, blue, worn, washed 100 times before. He didn't tug or rush. He lifted it carefully, as if the blanket mattered. Then he turned, and carried it back to his kennel. Slowly. Each step measured. Each movement deliberate. Inside the kennel, Milo lowered the blanket onto the floor. He nudged one corner with his nose. Adjusted it. Turned it once. Then circled and sat beside it, not on it, not over it. Beside it. His shoulders relaxed. His breathing softened. It looked finished. A staff member paused nearby. "That's new," she said quietly. Another shrugged. "Dogs do weird stuff." They went on with their work. But Milo stayed. When a volunteer reached in to straighten the kennel, her hand brushed the blanket. Milo leaned forward, not aggressive. Not guarding. Just present. She froze. "Oh, sorry, buddy," she murmured, pulling her hand back. Milo didn't growl. Didn't flinch. He simply sat, eyes steady, as if to say, "That one stays." The rest of the morning passed without incident. Then the next morning came. Same light. Same calm. Milo waited again. And again, he chose one blanket. Only one. Always one. Never the closest. Never the newest. He sniffed. Paused. Chose. By the third day, someone noticed the pattern. He does that every morning, a volunteer said, leaning on the cart. Same time. Same way. Another laughed softly. Guess he likes interior decorating. But the laughter didn't linger. Because Milo didn't treat the blankets like toys. Or beds. He treated them like something else. On the fourth morning, a young staff member named Claire stopped to watch. She stood still. Didn't interrupt. She noticed how Milo sniffed several blankets before choosing. How he hesitated just for a breath, then committed. How, once the blanket was placed, he exhaled, as if something unseen had eased. Claire crouched near his kennel. "You're very careful," she said softly. Milo didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on the blanket. That afternoon, she asked the front desk, "Do we know where he came from?" A pause. "Transferred in," someone said. "Owner surrender." Not much info. Claire nodded, but the question stayed. By the end of the week, Milo's kennel held a small stack. Neatly arranged. Touched daily. No shredding. No mess. Just presence. One volunteer tried swapping the blankets out, fresh ones, same color. Milo sniffed them, then gently pulled one of the older ones back into place. Not anxious. Not upset. Certain. Claire watched him sit beside the stack as the room quieted again. "You're not collecting comfort," she whispered. Milo's ears twitched. She didn't know why, but the thought felt true. This wasn't habit. It was memory. And Milo was responding to something no one else could see yet. Something warm. Something unfinished. What the shelter hadn't realized was that Milo wasn't taking blankets for himself. He was remembering something, one blanket at a time. By the second week, Milo's routine no longer felt accidental. It felt intentional. The shelter had learned his timing. Morning light first, then stillness, then movement. He never rushed. While other dogs paced or leaned forward with hopeful eyes, Milo waited. Sat quietly. Watched the room settle into itself, as if he needed the day to be ready before he began. Claire noticed that part most. She started arriving a few minutes earlier, coffee still warm in her hands, just to watch him. He would sit with his chest lifted and his head slightly tilted, listening. Not for commands, there were none, but for something internal. Something familiar. Only when the room softened, only when the energy felt right. Milo stood. His paws made almost no sound on the floor as he walked toward the laundry cart. The wheels squeaked faintly when he brushed past, but he didn't react. His focus never wavered. Today, Claire noticed something new. Milo didn't grab the first blanket. He sniffed 3. Slowly. One breath, then another. He lingered over a faded green one. Hesitated. Moved on. Then he stopped at a pale gray blanket near the bottom. His nose pressed gently into the fabric. His ears relaxed. His tail didn't wag, but his posture softened, like he found the right note in a quiet song. He lifted it carefully. Claire held her breath. Milo carried the blanket back with the same deliberate pace, stepping around bowls and shadows, never letting the fabric drag. Inside his kennel, he laid it beside the others, not on top, not separate. He adjusted the stack with care. Then sat. Beside them. Claire crouched again. "You choose them," she whispered. "You don't just take them." Milo glanced at her briefly, just a flicker of acknowledgement, then returned his attention to the blankets. Another volunteer passed by. "He always does that?" she asked. Claire nodded. "Every day." The volunteer laughed softly. Maybe he's building a nest. But Claire shook her head. No, she said quietly. He's not nesting. She didn't know how she knew, but Milo's behavior didn't look like comfort-seeking. He didn't curl into the blankets. Didn't sleep on them. He kept them close, but untouched. As the morning went on, Claire noticed something else. Whenever a new dog was brought into the room nervous, unsure, Milo's attention shifted. He'd glance toward the kennel. Toward the unfamiliar shape trembling on the other side of the aisle. Then back to the blankets. Once, when a small terrier whined softly, Milo stood and pressed his nose against the bars, listening. Not reacting, listening. Claire watched the moment carefully. It passed quickly. But something in her chest tightened. That afternoon, she checked Milo's intake notes more closely. Transferred. Adult. No behavioral flags. But one line caught her eye. Arrived with personal items. Claire frowned. What personal items? She asked the desk. The coordinator shrugged. A blanket, I think. Maybe two. They were washed with everything else. Claire felt a small, unexpected ache. That evening, when the shelter quieted again, she stayed late. She sat cross-legged outside Milo's kennel, the lights dimmed low and warm. Milo sat across from her. Between them, the blankets. You remember something, she said softly. Milo didn't respond the way people expect dogs to respond. He didn't tilt his head or wag. He simply stayed. Present. Steady. Claire reached into her pocket and pulled out a small notebook. She wrote down what she'd seen in the order, the pauses, the way Milo relaxed once the blanket was placed. This wasn't compulsion. It was recognition. The next morning, she tried an experiment. She rearranged the laundry cart slightly. Placed newer blankets on top. Older ones below. Milo approached as usual. He sniffed the new ones, then moved past them. He stretched his neck deeper into the cart, reaching for an older blanket, one that smelled faintly of detergent and thyme. It took effort, but he managed. When he carried it back, Claire felt her throat tighten. You're not choosing what's clean, she whispered. You're choosing what feels right. Later that day, a volunteer asked, should we stop him? He's taking supplies. Claire shook her head. Let him, she said gently. He's not taking. He's remembering. By the end of the week, Milo's kennel felt different. Not crowded. Not cluttered. Intentional. Each blanket felt placed, not piled. And Milo sat beside them like a quiet guardian, calm, focused, connected to something no one else could see yet. The shelter still thought they were watching a habit. But Claire was starting to understand. Milo wasn't collecting blankets. He was responding to a need that once mattered deeply, and still did. By the third week, Milo's routine had become a quiet topic of conversation. Not official. Not urgent. Just something people mentioned in passing, like the way the light hit the kennels in the afternoon, or how the older dogs seemed calmer when Milo was nearby. Did he grab another one today? Someone asked near the sink. Same time, another replied. Same way. The laughter that followed was gentle, but curious. Claire noticed the shift. People stopped calling it cute. They started calling it interesting. She watched as volunteers slowed down when they passed Milo's kennel. Some paused. Some crouched. A few whispered, as if loud voices might disturb whatever invisible rhythm he was following. Milo didn't react to the attention. He stayed the same. Calm. Focused. Every morning, he waited. Claire started keeping notes. Time. Color. Position. She noticed something that made her pause. Milo never chose two blankets in a row that were identical. Different colors. Different textures. Faded cotton. Soft fleece. Worn edges. It was as if variety mattered. One morning, a new volunteer, young, energetic, laughed as Milo passed with his blanket. "He's stealing again," she joked. Milo didn't flinch. But Claire felt something tighten. She knelt beside him once the blanket was placed. "He's not stealing," she said gently. "He's selecting." The volunteer raised an eyebrow. "Selecting for what?" Claire didn't answer. Because she wasn't sure yet. That afternoon, the shelter intake room was busy. A family had surrendered an older dog, quiet, gray-muzzled, wrapped in a familiar-looking blanket. The dog trembled slightly as staff spoke in low, careful voices. Milo stood at the far end of the aisle. Still. Watching. His ears lifted, not high, not alert, but open. He didn't bark. He didn't pull. He simply observed, his body leaning forward by the smallest degree. Claire followed his gaze. The blanket. She felt a slow chill, not fear, recognition. When the family left and the room settled, Milo turned away. Walked back to his kennel. Sat beside his stack. Claire wrote that down too. Reacts to arrivals. That evening, she gathered a few staff members near the break room. "Have you noticed Milo's timing?" she asked. One shrugged. "Hard not to." Another said, "He only takes one a day." "And always after intake hours slow down," Claire added. "He never does it during peak noise." Someone leaned back in their chair. "So," they said, "he's a dog. Dogs have routines." Claire nodded. "Yes," she said. "But routines usually revolve around comfort. Or anxiety." She paused. "This doesn't." The room went quiet. The shelter manager finally spoke. "What do you think it is, Claire?" Claire exhaled slowly. "I think he's responding to something he remembers," she said. "And I think the blankets are part of it." No one argued. They didn't agree either. But something had shifted. The next morning, someone left a note on the whiteboard. "Leave one extra blanket on cart. For Milo." Claire noticed it mid-morning and smiled. When Milo approached the cart, the shelter was unusually still. Conversations lowered. Movements slowed. Someone whispered, "Here he goes." Milo sniffed the blankets. Paused longer than usual. Then selected one that hadn't been there before, a pale yellow blanket with a small stitched corner. Claire felt her chest tighten. That blanket had come in with the older dog the day before. Milo carried it back. When he placed it beside the others, something changed. He didn't sit immediately. He stood over the stack for a moment, head lowered, breathing slow. Then he nudged the yellow blanket slightly closer to the center. Only then did he sit. Beside it. Claire wiped at her eyes before she realized they were wet. That afternoon, she pulled up Milo's transfer records again. Dug deeper this time. Called the previous shelter. "Do you remember him?" she asked. There was a pause on the line. Then, "Oh," the woman said softly. "Yes. The blanket dog." Claire closed her eyes. Her curiosity wasn't just hers anymore. It had spread. Among the staff. Among the routines. Into the quiet spaces of the shelter. And for the first time, someone was close to asking the right question. Claire stopped trying to figure Milo out. Instead, she started spending time with him. Not testing. Not interrupting. Just being there. She brought a folding chair into the kennel aisle one afternoon, the light outside already leaning toward evening. The shelter felt different at that hour, quieter, softer. The air carried the faint scent of detergent and kibble, warmed by the day. Milo sat in his kennel. The blankets were stacked neatly beside him. Claire didn't speak at first. She didn't reach through the bars. She didn't ask for attention. She simply sat, hands resting in her lap, breathing at the same pace the room seemed to breathe. Minutes passed. Then Milo shifted. He stood, stretched once, and turned so he faced her directly. He didn't step closer. He just acknowledged her. Claire smiled. "Hey," she said softly. Milo blinked. That was all. From then on, it became routine. Claire sat with Milo every afternoon. Sometimes she read intake forms. Sometimes she scrolled on her phone. Sometimes she did nothing at all. Milo watched. If another dog barked, he didn't react. If someone walked past, he followed them with his eyes, then returned his attention to Claire. And the blankets. Claire noticed the way his body softened when she was there. The way his breathing slowed faster. The way he leaned his weight subtly toward the stack, as if grounding himself. One afternoon, she brought a new blanket with her. Not from the cart. From home. It was clean, folded, soft, but unfamiliar. She placed it just outside his kennel and waited. Milo stood. Approached the bars. Sniffed. Then he turned away. Went back to his blankets. Claire nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Not that one." She removed it without pushing further. That night, she dreamed of shelves lined with folded fabric, each one holding a memory, each one chosen for a reason she couldn't explain. The next day, Milo surprised her. As she sat reading quietly, he stood and walked to the front of his kennel. He looked at her, really looked at her, then turned and picked up one of the blankets from his stack. He carried it to the bars. Claire's breath caught. Milo placed the blanket down gently, between them. Not pushing it through. Not dropping it at her feet. Just placing it there. Claire felt her eyes sting. "You're sharing," she whispered. Milo sat. They stayed like that for a long moment, the blanket resting on the floor, the bars between them, the quiet holding. From then on, Milo's behavior shifted subtly. He still collected one blanket a day. But now, he sometimes moved one closer to the front of the kennel when Claire arrived. As if including her in the ritual. Other staff noticed too. "He likes you," someone said with a smile. Claire shook her head. "It's not about me," she said. "It's about trust." One evening, the shelter manager approached her. "You've been spending a lot of time with him." Claire nodded. "He's teaching me something." The manager raised an eyebrow. "About what?" Claire watched Milo through the glass door. He was sitting beside his blankets, eyes half closed, the room reflected softly in them. "About listening," she said. That weekend, the shelter hosted a small adoption event. People came and went, voices low but excited. Milo stayed in his kennel, calm as ever. A little girl stopped in front of him. "Why does he have so many blankets?" she asked. Claire knelt beside her. "He needs them," she said simply. The girl nodded, accepting the answer without question. Later that afternoon, when the shelter quieted again, Claire sat with Milo and spoke softly. "You don't take what you don't need," she said. "You take what matters." Milo leaned forward just enough that his nose brushed the bars. A small thing. But Claire felt it. Connection wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It arrived in stillness. By the end of the week, Claire didn't feel like she was observing Milo anymore. She felt like she was being invited. Invited into a story told without words. Into a pattern shaped by care. Into a bond built slowly, deliberately, honestly. And somewhere in that quiet space between them, the meaning behind the blankets was drawing closer. Not as a mystery to solve, but as a truth waiting to be understood. The call came late in the afternoon. Claire was sitting at the small desk near intake, paperwork spread out in front of her, when her phone vibrated softly against the wood. She glanced at the screen. Previous shelter, missed call. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with anticipation. She stepped into the hallway where the light was warmer, quieter, and called back. "Hi, this is Claire," she said softly. "I'm calling about a dog named Milo." There was a pause. Then a voice older, calm, kind. Oh, the woman said. Yes. Milo. Claire closed her eyes. You remember him. How could I forget? The woman replied gently. He was special. Claire leaned against the wall. Can you tell me about him? She asked. About where he came from. The woman exhaled slowly, as if choosing her words with care. He was surrendered by an elderly man, she said. Quiet. Polite. Lived alone. Claire pictured it instantly, a small home, softened by time, windows that let the light in just right. He didn't bring much, the woman continued. But he brought blankets. Claire's grip tightened on the phone. More than one? She asked. Yes, the woman said. Several. Folded. Clean. He insisted on carrying them himself. Claire swallowed. What did they mean? She asked. Another pause. We didn't know at first, the woman said. But over time, we learned. Claire waited. He used to visit a care facility, the woman said. Voluntarily. The owner would bring him. Claire's breath caught. He would sit with residents, the woman continued. People who didn't speak much anymore. People who spent a lot of time in bed. Claire glanced through the glass door toward Milo's kennel. He'd carry blankets, the woman said softly. Place them beside the beds. Not on top. Just close. Claire felt tears gather. He did it every visit, the woman said. Always one blanket per person. Claire whispered, oh. When the call ended, she didn't move for a long time. She sat there, phone resting in her lap, the hum of the shelter surrounding her. Everything felt suddenly aligned. The timing. The care. The way Milo never lay on the blankets himself. That evening, Claire sat with Milo longer than usual. The lights were dimmed. The shelter was quiet. The blankets sat neatly beside him, colors muted in the soft glow. She spoke gently. You were helping, she said. You still are. Milo lifted his head. For the first time, he wagged his tail. Not fast. Not excited. Slow. Steady. Claire noticed something else now that she knew what to look for. Each blanket Milo chose felt different. One thicker. One lighter. One softer. As if matched to someone unseen. The next morning, something unexpected happened. A new intake arrived, an elderly woman surrendering her dog, hands shaking slightly as she spoke. She had brought a small blanket with her. Milo watched from across the room. He didn't move. He waited. When the shelter quieted again, Milo approached the cart. He sniffed the blankets, then walked past them. He stopped at the intake desk. At the small blanket folded there. Claire's breath caught. Milo picked it up gently. Carried it back. Placed it beside the others. And sat. Claire knelt, tears slipping free. You remember, she whispered. You remember who needs comfort. The staff didn't laugh that day. They stood quietly. Watched. Someone murmured, he's still doing his job. By the end of the week, the shelter felt changed. People spoke softer. Moved slower. They let Milo take his blanket each morning. Because now they understood. This wasn't habit. This was devotion. Milo wasn't collecting blankets. He was honoring the care he once gave and the care he still believed the world needed. And for the first time, Claire wondered. What would happen if Milo finally found someone who needed him just as much? The shelter felt different once the truth settled in. Not louder. Not heavier. Quieter, in a reverent way. Milo's morning ritual was no longer something people noticed casually. It became something they made space for. Conversations paused. Carts were nudged slightly aside. Someone always made sure the laundry bin wasn't blocked. And Milo continued, steady as ever. One blanket. One morning. But something in him began to change. Claire saw it first. He still chose carefully. Still paused. Still carried each blanket with that same deliberate care. But now, after placing it beside the others, he lingered. He didn't sit right away. He stood over the stack longer than before, head lowered, eyes soft. Sometimes he breathed in slowly through his nose, as if checking, listening. Waiting. One afternoon, a new volunteer named Daniel joined Claire by Milo's kennel. He watched quietly for a while before speaking. "He looks like he's expecting someone," Daniel said. Claire nodded. "That's exactly what it feels like." That evening, an elderly man came into the shelter. Not to adopt. Just to look. He moved slowly, leaning on a cane, his coat hanging loosely from his shoulders. He paused in front of several kennels, smiling politely, speaking softly to the dogs inside. When he reached Milo's kennel, he stopped. Milo stood. No barking. No pulling. He stepped forward and sat, directly in front of the man. The room seemed to hold its breath. The man knelt with effort, one hand braced against his knee. "Well," he said softly, "hello there." Milo leaned forward just enough for their foreheads to almost touch. Claire felt tears rise instantly. "He knows him," Daniel whispered. Claire shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "But he knows this." The man's eyes drifted to the blankets. "You like those?" he asked gently. Milo glanced back at them, then at the man. The man smiled, something breaking open in his expression. "My wife used to fold ours just like that," he said quietly. "Neat. Always neat." Claire stepped closer. "Would you like to sit with him?" she asked. The man nodded. They brought a chair. Slowly. Carefully. Milo lay down beside the man's feet, not touching, not leaning. Just close. Present. The man rested his hand on his knee. They stayed like that for a long time. No words. Just shared quiet. When the man finally stood, he wiped his eyes. "Thank you," he said. To him. Milo didn't move. But his tail wagged once. That night, Claire wrote in her notebook. Milo responds to people who carry quiet grief. The next morning, Milo hesitated. Longer than usual. He sniffed the blankets, then turned toward the front of his kennel. Toward Claire. He picked up one of the older blankets from his stack, the softest one, and carried it to the bars. Placed it down. Between them. Claire's breath caught. "You don't need to keep them all anymore," she whispered. Milo sat. For the first time, he didn't stay beside the stack. He stayed near her. That was the turning point. Milo wasn't letting go of his purpose. He was expanding it. The blankets were no longer just memories. They were invitations. By the end of the day, something felt clear. Milo didn't need more blankets. He needed a place where his instinct to comfort could live again. Not in pieces. Not in symbols. But in presence. And as Claire locked up that evening, she realized something else, something quiet, something life-changing. Milo wasn't waiting for someone to need his blankets. He was waiting for someone to need him. The decision wasn't announced. It didn't need to be. Claire simply stopped the cart one morning and looked at Milo. "Today," she said softly, "you choose, or you don't." Milo waited. The shelter was calm. Sunlight stretched across the floor in long, pale bands. Somewhere down the hall, a radio played quietly low, warm music that blended into the air. Milo stood. He walked toward the cart, then stopped halfway. Claire felt her breath catch. He turned instead toward his kennel. Toward the blankets. He lowered his head and sniffed each one slowly, deliberately. The stack wasn't growing anymore, it had reached its shape. Its purpose. Milo chose one. Not the newest. Not the oldest. The softest. He lifted it gently and carried it forward. Not back to the kennel. To Claire. He placed it at her feet. The room felt impossibly still. "You're ready," she whispered. That afternoon, the shelter received a call from a care facility across town. A volunteer program, quiet visits, optional, unhurried. They needed a dog. A calm one. A steady one. Claire didn't hesitate. The first visit was small. One room. One resident. An older woman sat by the window, hands folded, gaze distant. Claire entered softly, Milo walking beside her, leash loose. Milo paused at the doorway. Waited. Then stepped forward. He didn't jump. Didn't rush. He approached the woman and sat beside her chair. Looked up once, checking, then lay down near her feet. Claire placed the blanket beside the woman's chair. The woman noticed. She reached down slowly and touched the fabric. Her fingers stilled. "Oh," she whispered. "This feels like home." Milo didn't move. He breathed. Steady. Present. Over the next weeks, Milo visited often. Different rooms. Different faces. Always the same quiet. He no longer carried blankets from the cart. He carried them from the shelf Claire kept, washed, folded, ready. One blanket. One visit. Claire watched Milo work, if it could be called that. It didn't look like effort. It looked like truth. One afternoon, Claire realized the stack at the shelter was gone. Not removed. Released. Milo slept now. Curled. Rested. The blankets had served their purpose. And then one morning a couple walked into the shelter. Older. Gentle. They stood quietly, reading the adoption board. Claire approached them. "You're here for Milo," she said. The woman smiled softly. "We saw him at the facility," she said. "He sat with my sister." The man nodded. "He didn't need training," he said. "He already knew what to do." Milo stood when he saw them. He didn't bring a blanket. He brought himself. He sat at their feet, tail wagging once, slow and certain. Claire knelt, voice steady but soft. "He comes with a past," she said. "And a purpose." The woman smiled through tears. "So do we." The paperwork was simple. The goodbye was quiet. Claire knelt one last time. "You don't need to carry the blankets anymore," she whispered. "You can be home now." Milo leaned forward. Pressed his head gently against her shoulder. Then he turned and walked out the door. The house was quiet. Not empty, just calm. Morning light filtered through wide windows and settled gently on hardwood floors. A kettle warmed on the stove. Somewhere, a clock ticked in an unhurried rhythm. Milo lay on a soft rug near the window. Not guarding. Not watching. Resting. His breathing was slow, even, peaceful in a way that only comes when nothing is expected of you anymore. The woman, his new person, folded a blanket at the kitchen table. Her movements were careful, practiced, as if the act itself carried meaning. When she finished, she placed the blanket on the back of the couch. Milo lifted his head. He watched, but he didn't rise. That was how Claire knew when she visited weeks later that Milo was truly home. She stepped inside quietly. The house smelled faintly of tea and laundry soap. The man smiled as he welcomed her in. "He sleeps through the night now," he said softly. "All the way through." Milo opened one eye. Then the other. His tail wagged once. Claire knelt, and Milo stood to greet her, slow, gentle, familiar. He pressed his nose into her palm, then turned and lay back down. No blankets were stacked nearby. Just one, folded neatly on the couch. He still notices them, the woman said, following Claire's gaze. He just doesn't need to gather them anymore. Claire swallowed. In the afternoons, Milo went with them to the care facility. He walked beside the man, leash loose. He sat beside the woman when she rested. He moved from room to room with the same quiet presence he'd always carried. But now, he came home afterward. At night, Milo curled at the foot of their bed. The woman sometimes reached down and rested her hand on his back. He stayed still. Content. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the house filled with warm orange light, the woman folded another blanket, this one old, edges soft with age. She placed it on the rug near Milo. He stood. Claire's breath caught, just for a moment. Milo walked over. Sniffed. Then, he circled once and lay down on it. Not beside it. On it. The woman covered her mouth. He's keeping it, she whispered. Milo exhaled deeply. For the first time, the blanket was his. Claire stood quietly, tears sliding free. Milo had completed the journey he didn't know he was on. From remembering, to releasing. From carrying care for others, to accepting care for himself. Later, as Claire prepared to leave, she knelt one last time. You taught us how to notice, she said softly. How to slow down. Milo lifted his head. Met her eyes. Then rested his chin back on the blanket. Outside, the evening settled. Inside, everything felt whole. Milo no longer picked up blankets each day. He no longer needed to. Because the truth the shelter had finally realized was this. Milo wasn't collecting fabric. He was carrying love. Until someone gave him a place to set it down.